Hello Mind Mappers and welcome to the video. Today we're going to be going over The Paradox of Choice by Barry Schwartz. Now this book is going to be perfect for you if you're a person that struggles with making decisions, or perhaps you just have too much on your plate right now. This book is going to absolutely open your eyes to really a miracle solution to both of those problems. Now if you're new here, I want to just kind of quickly show you how this mind map is going to work. I pulled out the 6 best ideas from this book to share with you today. I've got 2 bright orange points here, and those are the 2 best ideas. So you want to make sure that you stay tuned for those 2 best ideas, only the best and gratitude. With that, we're going to get directly into the mind map with my introduction, The Paradox of Choice. The first quote that I pulled out from the book is that the fact that some choice isn't good doesn't necessarily mean that more choice is better. So, as I will demonstrate, he continues on, there is a cost to having an overload of choice. As a culture, we are enamored of freedom, self-determination, and variety, and we are reluctant to give up any of our options. Put your hand up if that's you or has been you in the past. But clinging tenaciously to all the choices available to us contributes to bad decisions, to anxiety, to stress, and dissatisfaction, even to clinical depression. Those are some pretty strong words. He's telling us that clinging tenaciously to all of our choices is really causing quite a lot of problems in our life. And you'll know this if you've ever felt overwhelmed by choice. Maybe you have to choose what job to get, or what career path to follow, what book to read, or what school to go to. These things are all normal decisions that we have to make during our lives, and not only that, but we're making decisions on a day-to-day basis. What should I work on today? What project is the highest priority for me? What about these 3 ideas that I have for different businesses? Which of these ideas should I go about? You can see how choice is really kind of happening everywhere in our lives, and more so, we're really kind of succumbing to this amazing power of all these amazing choices that we have. So what makes those things difficult? What makes those choices hard to make? Well, really, it's the sheer amount of choice that we have in the modern world. And the other thing is that it's possible that we might regret if we make the wrong choice. So if we choose the wrong business to start, if we choose quote unquote the wrong job to get, the wrong book, the wrong school, we might feel like we wasted time, energy, or money. All of these things that we see as unrenewable resources. So we have to be very careful of what choice we make, and that just kind of adds to the intensity of why making choices can sometimes be so difficult. So here's something very interesting that I learned from the book, that humans haven't had this amount of choice at almost any other time in history. It really is true that the amount of choice that we have today is far greater, far surpasses everything that has happened in the past. While all of it seemed good, all this choice seems good, Barry argues, and I'm on his side now, that the sheer amount of choice that we have is deteriorating our mental health. Inside this mind map, we're going to look into why that might be happening. Plus, I pulled out some of the practical tips that are going to help you overcome this paradox of choice. And now, if you're new to mind mapping, I want you to know that you're going to get the most out of these mind maps if you end up following along. You can find the process of how I go about mind mapping, plus this mind map and 50 plus other mind map templates, all at the link down below. Following along is going to help you learn more, remember better, and apply these books to your life. So I really recommend that you pause the video just for a minute and go and pick up this mind map so you can follow along. Now, our second main point here is about the arguments, right? The arguments is our first point. Throughout the book, you will learn about a wide range of research findings from psychologists, economists, market researchers, and decision scientists. Who even knew that there was a such thing as a decision scientist? All related to choice and decision making. So this book is really about choice, and choice is really decision making. It really is what choice is all about. There are important lessons to be learned from this research, some of them not so obvious, and others maybe even counterintuitive. For example, I will argue that we would be better off if we embraced voluntary constraints on our freedom of choice instead of rebelling against them. We would be better off if seeking what was good enough instead of seeking the best. Have you ever heard a parent say, "I only want good enough for my kids?" You can see that it's really kind of interwoven into our society that we don't want good enough, We want the best. We would be better off if we lowered our expectations about the results of our decisions. We would be better off if the decisions we made were non-reversible. How many times have you made a decision and then worried if you made the right decision or not all night and you couldn't sleep and you end up having a really bad day the next day? We would be better off if we paid less attention to what others around us were doing. And that's very difficult today with social media. So I'm definitely on your side here. I feel how difficult that can be. These conclusions fly in the face of conventional wisdom. That the more choices people have, the better off they are. That's the conventional wisdom. That the best way to get results is to have very high standards. And that it's always better to have a way to back out of a decision than to not have a way out. What I hope is to show you that the conventional wisdom is in fact wrong, at least when it comes to what satisfies us and the decisions that we make. So you can see all of these things, all of these 5 kind of points that we're going to learn about here today really are just going in the absolute face of conventional wisdom. It's the complete opposite of what we sometimes think we might want, and I'm very happy to bring you this idea, this kind of paradox, right? The only thing true in life is paradoxes. What are your initial reactions to these points? That's what I want you to think of. So a lot of these things have been ingrained in us since a very, very young age. Our parents only want the best for us, or it's always better to kind of be able to limit the downside, so to speak, of our decisions. What are your initial reactions to the point? I want you to take some time before we get into the rest of the book and think about this. What are your beliefs around choice, abundance, and innovation? Are you the type of person that always need the next new thing because what you have currently isn't good enough? Do you hold yourself to a really high standard when it comes to certain things in life? And how do you deal with the feeling that you might have made the wrong choice? Are you the type of person that has to stay up all night and worry about the choices that you either have to make or that you have already made? And the final one that I want you to think about is probably the most important in today's day and age. What is your relationship to comparison? Comparison to others, comparison to what you might have been able to do. That's a very, very important question to ask. And another way to think about comparison is to think about judgment. What is your relationship to judgment on yourself? Based on the decisions that you made, based on the place that you are at in life right now, based on where other people, your peers, are at in life right now. These are all thought strings deep in our minds that it may take time to unravel. These kind of arguments that Barry's putting forth here are very counterintuitive, and it might not be easy for you to adopt them fully right away. But these questions are good to ask yourself, in my opinion, on a frequent basis. Am I comparing myself to people? How am I dealing with this decision that I've made? Am I holding myself to an unreasonably high standard for no apparent reason? Do I need this next new thing? Do I need the next better thing? Because I want it or because I believe that I want it? Some of these questions are what I take my coaching clients through when they're dealing with self-criticism, doubt, and indecision. You can see how easily all of these questions could kind of dispel that criticism, doubt, and indecision that you're putting on yourself. If you're dealing with any of those, that criticism, doubt, or indecision, I would suggest that you reach out for a little bit of help. Click the link down below for a free sample coaching session. Absolutely no obligation necessary. And with that, we're going to move on to our first main point, which is only the best. Barry says in the book that choosing wisely begins with developing a clear understanding of our goals. And the first choice you must make is between the goal of choosing the absolute best and the goal of choosing something that is good enough. If you seek to accept only the best, which is what most of us, maybe entrepreneurs and people that are reading personal development, are probably doing, you are a maximizer. Maximizers need to be assured that every purchase or decision was the best that could be made. Yet, how can anyone truly know that any given option is absolutely the best possible? As a decision strategy, maximizing creates a daunting task, which becomes all the more daunting as the number of options increases. So, as he says here, how can we ever know if the decision that we made is the best one possible? In fact, it goes to say that statistically, the decisions that we make are almost never, probably impossibly, the best decision that we could have made because of the infinite amount of choices and decisions that we could possibly make. The alternative to maximizing is to be a satisficer. To satisfice is to settle for something that is good enough and not to worry about the possibility that there might be something better. A satisficer has criteria and standards. She searches until she finds an item that meets those standards, and at that point, she stops. The difference between the two types of people is that the satisficer is content with the merely excellent as opposed to the absolute best. So I do want to stop here for a second and say that a satisficer isn't someone that doesn't try. They're not someone that doesn't look for something good. It doesn't look for something that is going to meet the needs that they have. It's not that type of person, right? That type of person is maybe a third subgroup that doesn't really fit into the paradigm that we're talking about here. But a satisficer is the type of person that knows what they want, goes out and finds it, and is done with it. And that's a very powerful position to come from. I believe that the goal of maximizing is a source of great dissatisfaction, that it can make people miserable, especially in a world that insists on providing an overwhelming number of choices, both trivial and not so trivial. So the world is really giving us more and more choices through marketing, through advertising, through innovation. All of these things are great. And why are they great? Because these things are quite often satisfying a need that someone is going to have. But here's where the problem comes in. Those amazing amount of choices and those amazing kind of copywritten pages and those amazing sales techniques that they're using, they're really kind of feeding into this maximizer mentality that you have to make the right decision, that you have to find the exact right thing for you. And as Barry says here, it really is kind of making people miserable. So I want you to think here, which category are you falling into? Are you a maximizer or a satisficer? And it might depend on the domain that we're talking about. It doesn't necessarily mean that you're a maximizer in all domains or a satisficer in all domains. The truth is that maximizing and satisficing orientation tend to be domain specific. Nobody is a maximizer in every decision, and probably everybody is in some. Perhaps what distinguishes maximizers from satisficers is the range and number of decisions in which an individual operates as one or the other. So it's kind of, are you a maximizer in some places, in which case that's totally okay, but are you a maximizer in more cases than you are a satisficer? And if that's the case, you're going to be running into trouble down the line. This is good news because what it means is that most of us have the capacity to be satisficers. The task then for someone who is feeling overwhelmed by choice is to apply the satisficing strategy more often and letting go the exception that the best is attainable. So if you're really struggling with a decision, check in and ask yourself, is the reason I'm struggling simply because I'm looking for the best and I'm not willing to settle for good enough? Let's take some time to write them down. I tend to be a maximizer in maybe fitness and nutrition, business, and my career, and this has definitely caused me a lot of headaches in the past. I want you to think about times that you've had really difficult times in your life, and it has been because you've been trying to be a maximizer. Now, fitness and nutrition, I used to be a personal trainer. I used to only eat ridiculously healthy, and I used to exercise 7 days a week for sometimes upwards of 2 hours. Now, that was simply too much. It was taking away a lot of things from other areas in my life. It was causing me a lot of mental stress and a lot of physical stress. And the same can be said of different times in my business and career. Because of my tendency to be a maximizer in these two areas, I've actually had quite a lot of stress, anxiety, and adverse effects in these two specific places. I want you to think about where you are feeling these adverse effects and are you being a maximizer, not settling for good enough and instead striving for the absolute best in those areas of your life. Now, I tend to be a satisficer in cars and clothing. I pretty much drive just an old, beat-up car, even though I could definitely afford a brand new one if I wanted to. I just really don't care that much about cars, and maybe some of you can't relate to that whatsoever. I also am a satisficer in clothing. I wear the same type of t-shirt, the same type of pants, and the same socks and shoes every single day. Now, I have multiple different multiple different pairs of pants and shirts and stuff like that, but it all looks the same. Just keeps my choices low, and I don't really care about fashion at all. Let's go through this exercise for you. How much time are you spending thinking or stressing about your maximizer domains? How much time are you spending about thinking or stressing about your satisficer domains? Probably not that much. I don't think about my car almost at all. I don't think about my clothing almost at all. But my fitness and nutrition and business and career, I can definitely tend to be a maximizer, and that definitely causes me a lot of strife. Now, let's try to determine if the maximizer juice is really worth the squeeze. Was it worth it for me to work out and eat only healthy food for so long in my life? And I can look back and, I can feel the stress again, and it was just horrible. Now, I'm still very fit, I'm still eating very healthy, and I'm exercising quite often, but I don't have nearly the amount of stress and strife around it because I'm doing what's good enough. And the same with my business and career. There's a lot of things that you can't control around business and career. You have to be willing to settle for good enough at a certain point in time. Now, this is kind of counterintuitive advice, and I feel a little weird even putting it out there, but this has been extremely helpful for me and a lot of my coaching clients, so I really recommend you take some time and sit down and meditate on this if you have the chance. Next, we're going to talk about antidotes. The news I've reported is not good. Here we are, living in the pinnacle of human possibility, awash in material abundance. As a society, we have achieved what our ancestors could at most only dream of, but it has come at a great price. We get what we say we want, only to discover that what we want doesn't satisfy us to the degree that we expect. We are surrounded by modern, time-saving devices, but we never seem to have enough time. Who can relate to that? We are free to be the authors of our own lives, but we don't exactly know what kind of lives we want to write. The success of modernity turns out to be bittersweet. And everywhere we look, it appears that significant contributing factors is the overabundance of choice. Having too many choices produces psychological distress, especially when combined with regret and concern and status. Adaptation, social comparison, and perhaps most important, the desire to have the best of everything, or to maximize. I believe there are steps that we can take to mitigate, even eliminate, many of these sources of distress. But they aren't easy. They require practice, discipline, and perhaps a new way of thinking. On the other hand, each of these steps will bring its own reward. Now that we see how choice is potentially eroding our mental states, and I gave you a couple of examples of how it really was eroding my personal mental state before I discovered this concept almost by accident, what might we actually do about it? What might be the steps that we could overcome our maximizer tendencies? Well, Barry says here that each of these practices, which we're going to talk about later, will require practice, discipline, and a new way of thinking. Now, why might this be? Isn't it just a process of eliminating the choice? Well, sort of. But choice is abundant in our society, and putting unneeded restrictions on that choice can actually feel quite restrictive. Now, if you've ever maybe had a meal plan, here's a really good example. If you had a meal plan, you understand that, okay, I'm taking away a lot of the choice as far as what I might eat and that sort of a thing. But that can end up starting to feel quite restrictive. Actually, if you think about it, restricting your choice is just putting more pressure on the choices that you make. So you have to make one choice, and that choice has to be very kind of pressure loaded because it has to be the right choice. This may cause us to create some pretty unhealthy relationships with choice, and a meal plan is a perfect example. I don't know very many people that can follow a meal plan that don't end up having a pretty unhealthy relationship with not only with food, but around the choices that they're making with their foods. So what might we focus on in order to develop a healthy relationship with choice? Well, I believe that the most behavior change starts with the level of thought. Once we're able to change the way that we think in a situation, we often find it easy or natural to actually change our actions. They almost happen by themselves. This book showcases over 11 things that we can do about the paradox of choice. I've chosen the two that I think can help you and help you change in every way and help you change the most effectively. And the two that we're going to talk about today are actually gratitude, which is our next main point here, and the Joneses. First, let's start with gratitude. We can vastly improve our subjective experience by consciously striving to be more grateful for what is good about the choice or an experience, and to be disappointed less by what is bad. It may seem demeaning to accept the idea that experiencing gratitude just takes practice. Why not just tell yourself that starting tomorrow, I'm going to pay more attention to what's good in my life and be done with it? The answer is that habits of thought die hard. Chances are that if you gave yourself that general directive, you won't actually follow it. Instead, you might consider adopting a simple routine. Keep a notepad at your bedside. Every morning when you wake up or every night when you go to bed, use the notepad to list 5 things that happened the day before that you're grateful for. These objects of gratitude occasionally will be big, a job promotion, a great first date, but most of the time they will be small. Sunlight streaming in through the bedroom window, a kind word from a friend, a piece of swordfish cooked just the way you like it, an informative article in a magazine. You will probably feel a little silly and even self-conscious when you start doing this. But if you keep it up, you will find that it gets easier and easier and more natural. You may also find that yourself discovering things that to be grateful for that even once the most ordinary days. Finally, you may find yourself feeling better and better about life as it is, and less driven to find the new and improved products and activities that will enhance it. Now, gratitude is probably the single most important practice, aside from meditation, that I've implemented in my life. At first, it definitely does feel a little bit weird, but I'll tell you what, eventually you start to look forward to it. The great part about gratitude for me is really the pattern interrupt. You see, being a busy business owner, I tend to have a lot of pending things on my mind, which can tend to be stressful. Maybe I lose a contract or I don't close a sale and I end up sliding into a negative headspace perhaps for weeks. This is in my marketing business and perhaps even in my coaching business to a large extent. But when I sit down and I try for some small, really important small things that I'm grateful for, it interrupts the pattern and I can move into a more positive headspace. That's what I find, at least. You might find gratitude is beneficial to you for another reason. Actually, it's a great tool to pattern interrupt other people as well. What are 3 small things that you're grateful for? How could you be grateful for this situation? 2 questions that I ask my coaching clients all the time. Here's a little exercise that you can try right now. Write down 3 things that you're grateful for right now. And if you have this mind map, go ahead and fill it out right in the mind map along with us. I look forward to hearing from you guys down in the comments, telling me what the 3 things you're grateful for are. Now, our final point is about the Joneses. And you guys know what we're going to talk about here, I hope. Everyone knows this analogy. We evaluate the quality of our experiences by comparing ourselves to others. Though social comparison can provide useful information, it often reduces our satisfaction. So many of us can relate to that. Definitely, social comparison is a difficult hurdle to overcome, especially now with social media being so widespread. So by comparing ourselves to others less, we will actually be more satisfied. Social comparison seems sufficiently destructive to our sense of well-being that it is worthwhile to remind ourselves to do it less. Because it is easier for a satisficer to avoid social comparison than a maximizer, learning that good enough is good enough may actually reduce concern with how others are doing. Following the other suggestions that I've made sometimes mean that when judged by an absolute standard, the results of our decisions will be less good than they might otherwise have been. All the more reason to fight the tendency to make social comparison. Here's 2 steps. Remember that he who dies with the most toys wins is a bumper sticker and not real wisdom. Focus on what makes you happy and what gives you meaning in life. It's really a 2-step process. Keeping up with the Joneses is one of the most harmful things that you can do for your own mental health. But it's not just because you're spending more on houses, cars, or furniture. Most people think it's simply because, I'm not going to have as much in retirement, or I have to get a more and more stressful job in order to afford the things to keep up with my friends, or whatever it might be. But actually, it's because of the toxic mindset that it can create. Externally, it looks like you're working hard and buying nice things, but internally, you're motivating yourself through judgments based on other people's opinions. This is quite simply your inner critic taking on the voice of other people's opinions, making it even stronger and more persuasive. Focus on what makes you happy and gives meaning to your life. That's what I want to leave you with here today. Thanks so much for being with me, and I hope to see you in the next mind map.